accelerate people and ideas to tackle agriculture's most important challenges. Our mission is to build trust and understanding where agriculture and society meet. Farm Foundation's Innovation and Education Campus brings that mission to life. Set on a historic 14-acre campus in Libertyville, Illinois, the Innovation and Education Campus is more than a meeting space. It's neutral ground for meaningful dialogue and bold thinking, a space for collaboration where seasoned experts and emerging leaders come together to inspire and drive change. Around the table, voices from across the food and ag value chain convene to listen deeply, plan strategically, and work collectively, turning conversations into connections. Join us at the Innovation Education Campus and be part of the movement shaping food and agriculture for generations to come. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us today for the Farm Foundation Forum, Automation for a Resilient Future for Agriculture. I'm Tim Brennan, Vice President of Programs and Strategic Impact here at Farm Foundation, and it's a pleasure to present today's forum. A special thank you goes out to Farm Credit for their generous support in making this important conversation possible. Before we get into today's program, I'm going to take a few moments to share a bit more about Farm Foundation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit working at the intersection of agriculture and society to address the challenges that affect the entire food and ag value chain. Specifically, we're an accelerator of practical solutions for agriculture, accelerating people and ideas into action. The three levers we use to accomplish this are policy, innovation, and education. Forums such as today are just one part of our extensive program of work, which is guided by our mission to build trust and understanding at the intersection of agriculture and society, and our vision to build a future for our farmers, our communities, and our world. We rely on partnerships and coalitions to fund our work and increase our impact. So if you're interested in learning more about partnering with us, I encourage you to reach out. Again, thank you all for being part of today's forum. As a reminder, Farm Foundation is a nonprofit. We rely on the generosity of people and partners like you to keep programs like this thriving. Programs like this, where experts and stakeholders across agriculture share the latest insights and solutions, are possible only because of that support. If you're inspired by what you hear today, I invite you to make a gift to help us continue offering events like this at no cost to participants. Our team will post a secure donation link in the chat, but you can also visit farmfoundation.org and click the donate tab at the top of the page. Every contribution of any size directly fuels our ability to bring people together and advance practical solutions in agriculture. Thank you for considering a gift and being a part of our important work. Farm Foundation shares a lot about what's happening in our work and across the sector on our social media pages. Be sure to check us out in spaces like LinkedIn and Facebook and stay up to date on our work. So before we start today's forum, here's a few housekeeping notes. This forum is a bit different than others. Our presenters will be responding to questions and having more of a dialogue with each other. If you have questions for the panelists, please drop them in the Q&A function below as they come up, and we'll try to address them along the way. This forum is being recorded and will be posted on our website at farmfoundation.org, as well as on our YouTube channel, and we'll send that link out to everyone following today's program. When the forum concludes, you'll also receive a link for a brief survey. We really appreciate it if you'd fill that out. Now, let's turn to today's forum. I'm going to introduce each of our panelists and let them tell you a little bit about themselves before we jump into today's conversation. First, I'd like to introduce Nathan Dorn. Nathan is Director of Industry Relations at F3 Innovate, where he supports the acceleration of ag technology adoption through education, competition, training, funding, and partnerships between farmers and technologists. Nathan, tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, at F3 Innovate, we are directly connected with the five Central Valley, California counties, helping farmers to put innovation into their fields and commercialize it as fast as possible, realizing the value of each of their products and improving the local economies of Southern California through ag tech innovation and making sure that our core economy, a core activity, the $30 billion of food produced in South Central Valley, California, can continue to feed and fuel the nation.
Great. Thank you so much, Nathan. Our next panelist is Elizabeth Fastiggi. Elizabeth is Chief Product Officer at Idealyst Innovation, where she develops products that help farmers and ranchers manage critical risks and build a healthier, more transparent food system. Elizabeth?
Hi, good morning. Thanks for the introduction, Tim. As Tim mentioned, I'm Chief Product Officer at Idealyst. Prior to that, I built the agri-food practice at Amazon Web Services. And prior to that, I was a private equity investor in the energy and agriculture sectors, and then had a few operating roles within agriculture. So definitely approach this topic from a few different vantage points, and really excited to be here today. At Idealyst, we are building a product foundry that is specifically focused on helping farmers with optimizing the business rather than the agronomic aspects of their operation. Obviously, both are critically important, but we've discovered in our intelligence and deep work with farmers that they really need more tools and services to help them optimize their business and really focus on the profitability of the operation. And we know that those tools and capabilities are a real imperative in light of the current and future headwinds that we see facing the industry. So we are working with the credit and insurance organizations that serve farmers to ideate and co-build products that we believe will help the farmer of today really navigate successfully into the future.
Great. Thank you so much. Next, please help me join me in welcoming Shail Kayara. Shail is CEO of Swarm, an agentic AI platform transforming industry relations. Shail, why don't you tell us a little bit more?
First of all, thank you, Tim and Morgan and Katie, for inviting me to this and the wonderful work that you're doing with the Farm Foundation. Really excited to be here. I apologize to everyone in advance. It's really bad to start a webinar with an apology, but I have to drop off in about an hour at the top of the hour. So I'm Shail. I'm based a global citizen based out of San Francisco, CEO of Swarm Engineering. We are an AI-powered decision intelligence company that is focused on agriculture, food, and supply chains. And my background spans, leading multiple global organizations in automation and AI. And I've co-authored some books, one being on intelligent automation, and a more recent one being on agentic AI. When we wrote agentic AI, it wasn't because the world needed another AI book. It was because we kept seeing the same problem of companies running pilots, experimenting with tools, but not getting real scale and impact. And the potential was there, but the results weren't. And a lot has changed in agentic AI since we published the book a couple of months ago. What drives me is really helping farmers and enterprises move from firefighting to foresight, using AI, I would say, to make better, faster decisions. There's tremendous amount of intrinsic and experiential experience within the minds of the farming community and enterprises that supply our food chain, and AI can supplement and augment that.
Great. Thank you so much, Shail. Finally, our fourth panelist is Ben Pallone. Ben is Senior Director of Automation and Commercialization at Western Growers Association. He leads efforts to advance agricultural innovation there. Ben, can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, thank you, Tim. And thank you for Farm Foundation for having me on. It's a great pleasure. I appreciate everything the Farm Foundation does. So real quick about Western Growers, we're a advocacy association. We represent 2,200 growers in the fresh fruit, fresh veg, nut, and berry production systems. Our growers represent almost all of those products within the U.S. and a large portion of exported products for the world. specifically with the Western Growers Association, I work with startup companies, startup ag tech companies. I work with large OEMs, the John Deere's, Kubotas, AGCOs, CNHIs. And I work with, obviously, our growers and venture capital and other financial institutions to, solve really our biggest needs and pain points of our growers and farmers. Currently today, our biggest pain points are labor fragility and how are we going to continue to farm and produce all the different fresh fruit and vegetables and nuts, as I spoke earlier. And that really comes down to, providing all of the different ways in which our growers farm and working with all the individual startups and, providing commercialization efforts and different strategies in order to make all this ag tech stuff really work out. In my personal background, I have been in the equipment space for the past 25 years or so. I've worked for 3 different ag tech companies, startup companies. I've also worked for one large grower in a couple different growing operations, kind of ag adjacent. I've come into agriculture and into the growing industry through the equipment side. So it's a little bit about me and my background in Western growers.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben. So let's jump into our discussion. And just a reminder, if you have questions, just go ahead and drop them in the Q&A section, not in the chat section. If it's in the chat section, I can't see it. So please put it in the Q&A and we'll get to it as soon as we can. The first section I want to focus on is really around, I think, the word of the year, which is volatility. I think everybody would agree this is an incredibly volatile year, from trade to weather and just about everything in between. So let's focus on volatility, but also adaptation. First question, which I'll throw out, and anybody can go ahead and get started. Farmers deal with weather, markets, supply chain disruptions every day. Where can automation realistically help them adapt rather than just react to that volatility?
Yeah, look, Tim, I think, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Shale.
I was going to say volatility isn't an exception in agriculture. It's the baseline, right? Farmers are battling with shifting weather, fluctuating markets, logistic disruptions, trucks not on time, barges not on time, prices, tariffs, you name it. And the shift today is from firefighting to how do you get foresight? So I was talking about agentic AI earlier. There are multi-agent systems that allow you not just to plan, but to continuously replan in order to manage that volatility. In Brazil, for example, there's a cane processor that is using agents to rebalance sugar versus ethanol. Should we make sugar or should we make ethanol from cane? And a lot of it is dependent on prices and contracts and demand and trucking availability. And when you look at, on a farm, adaptive irrigation is another example. It combines soil sensors, weather feeds to anticipate the stress days before they show up. So the power is in automation that not just adjusts, but automation that doesn't also lock you into yesterday's assumptions. So I'd say it's, don't automate the plan, automate the replanning is critical to think about.
I would
I'll
also-
second Shale's. Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth, please.
Nathan. Well, I just wanted to take a step back for a minute here and kind of acknowledge the landscape in which farmers and really everyone in agriculture is operating within, because when we think about the role of automation or the role of artificial intelligence, what we're really talking about is a whole set of new tools and capabilities that help us manage complexity. And complexity is really the name of the game in this industry. Farmers have been managing that, frankly, on their own in many ways for a very long period of time. And from our perspective, because we have a very research intelligence based foundation to what we do, there's a level of complexity that is really, we're facing an environment of compounding risk when we look at the impacts of global affluence, geopolitics, human health, and sort of what that's doing to the demand side of the equation in agriculture. And then if we look at the supply and production side, we have the role of climate and weather unpredictability, the shifting landscape within within technology, and even in ownership structures. And if you look at any one of these things, they have layers of complexity. But when you think about all of them together, this really is an unprecedented time in terms of what farmers and ranchers are really facing. So we look at these capabilities as an opportunity to really automate what you can and sort of get what you can out of your day-to-day, what takes up time and bandwidth, so that farmers can focus on the things that they uniquely need to focus on and are actually within their control. And it's really a matter of looking at that landscape and kind of understanding, okay, what could I outsource? What could I automate versus where do I really need to focus my time and attention? And that's the framework that we believe is the right one for thinking about where and how to prioritize these capabilities.
And California, where I work today, most of the farmers have dealt with hostility of the environment and volatility from beginning. I mean, it doesn't rain here from the beginning of the season in May all the way till October 30th. So every year, so we've adapted and managed what we could in the environment by building out our own canal systems, our own irrigation systems, and much of the crops that grow here are because of that. And it has changed over time. Salinas was the sugar beet capital of the world. No longer the case. We don't even grow much sugar beet here. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Ben. And then you go to Napa, and it was the prune capital of the world. We grew all sorts of different crops, and over time, it's moved along. But we have managed to maintain the viability of the economics of those crops throughout generations. So volatility is what farmers deal with every day. The nice part about mechanization and automation, it gives us a chance to measure within it. So the best decision a farmer can make is when to not farm that piece of ground. And that piece of ground might be a square foot, it might be 5 acres, it might be a whole section with that crop. So by making that choice, by having that data set on a tree by tree level, on a plant by plant level, or even in the middle of a soybean field in Iowa, you get that opportunity through a lot of the data coming through mechanization, and that's giving you that lead on that decision making before you lose too much money, or or get a chance to make more money in that opportunity.
Yeah, very well said, other three panelists here. I think, the complexity, hostility, volatility has always been within farming. I believe the technology gives you the granularity, as Nathan was describing, as what Shell described, to allow growers and farmers to put them ahead of, to the point where they're predicting where things are instead of sitting back and making that kind of game time decision. Allows them to kind of project out and forecast into the future. So.
Thank you. So, can you guys give an example of where automation has already made operations more resilient on the farm, or maybe in processing or distribution?
Yeah, happy to take this one first. In the specialty crop sector, we have, even to this day, there is not a lot of herbicides that are used in post-emergent crops that are going. Think your lettuces, think your brassicas. All the lettuces that people enjoy throughout the US and the world on a daily basis are, for the most part, weeds were still picked by hand. Think of teams of 20 to 30 people out in the field with either, hose, hand hose, or even on their hands and knees in the case of arugula and spinach and other spring mixes and high density grown leafy greens, on their hands and knees pulling weeds out. And this is, even still to this day, those crews are very prevalent. You drive up and through the Salinas Valley and you would see a handful of these crews operating on a daily basis. So some of the impact that's really taken shape here and has really helped out has been in the weeding space. We have smart cultivators, whether that's FarmWise or Stout Industrial Technology, Weed Spider, and a couple of others. We have laser weeders that literally roll through the fields and shoot weeds with lasers. And there are precision and ultra precision application smart sprayers that are starting to take effect here in leafy greens, but also in onions. So to kind of break through that a little bit, part of some of the efforts I do is to create technical financial viability case studies analyzing ag tech through actual financial data to allow growers to be able to say, should I have this on my farm? And this is all data from our leading edge growers like Braga Fresh, JV Smith, Taylor Farms that have bought into the technology. So with laser weeding specifically, Braga Fresh analyzed, I've been running this laser weeder for a year. They allowed me to publish their data, and that's on our website on Western Growers. You can see that. They were able to take their crews of the weeding crews of, I believe, 21, 3 different crews of 21, and be able to take those crews and move, I believe, 22 of those people from those different crews and move them over to harvest. And it was really for the first time, I'd say in 2021, 2022, where we were actually starting to see a lot of crews being able to be full again. For the most part, in the late 2018s and 19s, every single weeding crew, every single harvest crew was short. So we've seen a lot of impact in the weeding technologies, and it seems to be doing really well. And we have a whole other hosts of different technologies that are starting to come into play, but we have really seen the weeding space, precision spray application really take off and is doing great work today.
I think
Ben, I'll
that's
tell you that.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
such a
I don't think there's a farmer in the Midwest that doesn't want that laser weeder. So let's hope that makes it to a broader market really soon. Elizabeth, I'm
right.
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think this is such a great example of, in this case, because of labor challenges, where the ROI here really pencils out, right? So this is an example of a situation where leveraging these technologies, these capabilities, it it makes complete sense from the bottom line. And just to sort of add the broadacre perspective, which again is a little bit, it's more focused on how can farmers reduce their input costs when we're looking at commodity row crops. But I've seen numbers such as, targeted herbicide application is saving 28 to 60% on input costs compared to broadcast applications. So again, that's another example where you're seeing adoption of this in a different type of crop, but from that same perspective of, that really focused on that near-term ROI.
And I think the
Yeah.
piece to add to both of those statements from Ben and Elizabeth is that farmers value most time. We don't get the task done on time. We don't get a chance to be in the field and get the proper revenues and yields that we want, whether it's weeding not on time or harvest not on time. In the Midwest, 25 years ago, I was a wheat harvester, and we had a case combine with 30-foot or 25-foot heads, and we ran about 3.5 miles per hour. We threw out 4% out the back of the combine because we measured it. We knew what was going on. Through genetics, we've increased yields in each of those fields, but also my family still runs that same harvest crew business, and they run 40-foot heads with autonomous level setting on the heads, and it actually bends the heads so that they can harvest more of the field faster at that same time. And that 45-foot head now runs through the field at 8.5 miles an hour, still throwing out 3 to 4% of the product out the back. Not like in the older days when we didn't have the precision measurement tools to know how much product was going out the back, where it was coming out of the field, which parts of the field were doing the genetics. And the most critical component in the Midwest right now is, will I get my crop harvested prior to that end of year or that rain that starts to come on and knock the fruit off or knock the kernels off my wheat or my corn? So getting into the field, getting the product done, getting that time is basically putting that machine in the field. It's doing 3 times the work it did only 25 years ago. And in the specialty crops in California, it takes 30% of a worker's time to walk in and out of the field to pick a box of strawberries. They'll walk into the field, pick a box, and walk back out of the field with that single box that you'll be buying from the grocery store yourself. It was picked directly by a person in the field, but they walked all that. Harvest machines, harvest aids are allowing people to be right up against the product, spend all of their time in the field picking and making their own revenue, and also reducing the amount of time, total time needed by the farmer to get the job done.
I think I agree. I think time is a critical component, no doubt. And some of the examples that many of you have heard involve robotics and to some extent software as well. And your question was about automation, but I'll give you a pure AI example. I'll keep it short and quick. Agrovision is the largest berry producer in Peru, and they're moving 15,000 people daily in harvest season to pack, pick, and ship berries. That's a workforce planning nightmare to hire 15,000 people and move them around. Using AI helps them to do that within minutes. Arden Mills, the largest baking flour manufacturer in the US, runs 43 mills, and flour goes from a mill to a muffin in 48 hours, right? By the time it's made in a mill to the time it gets into a baked good. And a digital twin of that in AI with 80 million variables that, allow agents to reallocate when rail slips in Kansas, for example, flexing Minnesota, Texas to cover. And what we hear from leaders is, look, we suspected this, but we couldn't hold the entire system in our heads, and AI helps us to do that. So the AI twin produces options with quantified trade-offs, right? Cost, margins, customer success, and so on. And that's resilience. That's not a single fix, but options that are surfaced in real time. So I agree, farmers value time, but as much as that, options are critically important. I think resilience is options on demand, not hope on a spreadsheet.
Well said. So I'm going to jump over to the Q&A section. I appreciate folks putting their questions in there. Has there been any discussion about how this technology can be utilized to go beyond the monoculture mindset of farming and employ more complex cropping systems rather than just use less labor or inputs?
I mean, from the specialty crop side, not a lot of monoculture going on, right? We have, and maybe this is a good point for people to understand a little bit more of the specialty crops. There could be 3 rotations grown in a single summer season in the Salinas Valley. If you start with a fast crop like a spinach or arugula, then go to a traditional iceberg or romaine lettuce, and then finish that off with a broccoli, cauliflower, celery, you can get a bunch of different rotations. Now, when you talk about some of the permanent crops, obviously that's a little bit different. And you're talking about if you could plant some sort of different crop with inside, whether if you're trying to do, apples and then trying to do a lettuce crop or something in between the rows, it's a little bit different than what there are some small people working on that. But as far as, technology and monocropping and others, technology and, AI, as Shayla describes, we are trying to implement a lot of different models and a lot of different machine deep learning tools to help us understand where best the rotations can go. If you think about, if you have hundreds of years of historical data in some of the growing regions where you can say, okay, our yields were this much in this field with this rotation at this time of the year with this kind of BTUs of growing degree days, and here was all the cost for our inputs, and just analyze all of that data over the past 100+ years, you would be able to map out how you can optimize the rotation, right? And optimize different rotations to be able to make the farm more profitable. And while every grower does think about, the soil and the ground and being good stewards of the land, ROI and profitability has to be paramount in all this. I don't know of a single grower today in the specialty crop space that is really kind of being out there and using a lot of these AI tools to help. And I'm trying to step in and help them understand where it can be. We see that as avenues that can go. But today it's fits and starts for sure. It's not something that's well implemented.
No, I think that's a good point that you make, Ben. And I'm curious, Ben and Nathan and Elizabeth, if you've seen this, which is that most of the automation is pitched as efficiency within the monoculture model. Fewer passes of the tractor, less fertilizer, optimized labor, but the same AI agentic systems that replan around weather, some of the examples I was giving you about weather logistics, can also model multi-crop interactions. So a concept that is widely and used as an example in the industrial space or the manufacturing space of creating digital twins of their operations. That concept within farming seems to have lesser adoption, right? Digital twins of fields that could simulate rotations, cover crops, intercropping as an example, not just the yield, but long-term soil health, looking at past dynamics, as you were talking about, Ben, and what kind of carbon outcomes could you have? This digital twin concept seems to be missing within the ag space, at least from my vantage point. And my vantage point is very limited, so I'm interested in your thoughts.
I mean, Central Valley farmers, Salinas Valley farmers, they have a rotation. A berry farmer loves to follow a broccoli farmer. A lettuce farmer loves to follow a berry farmer, partly because broccoli has chemical compounds that suppress natural diseases in soil. So those definitely help out. Broccoli leaves tons. I think it's 90 tons, Ben, correct me, of green matter inside the soil that'll decompose and become product for the future crops. Strawberries are a big consumer of fertility, which helps out, and they suppress weeds the way we grow them under plastic culture. So, and that helps out a lettuce farmer follow right behind and get a faster and better crop. So there's a specific rotation that actually helps out. Diseases that affect berries in the 4 microsclerotia per milligram of soil will not affect lettuce until there are hundreds of units in the same gram of soil. So the whole thing is that there is a natural rotation. We learn AI will definitely help. It'll codify and share it with the rest of the world so that we can do that. But I think that story happens every day with all of us.
And if we're thinking about this from the business side of the operation, what we're really talking about here is income diversification, right? Which is a really good business strategy, regardless of what type of business that you run. But for a farmer, and given that we have a lot of changes from a global macro perspective in terms of the supply demand shifts that we're seeing within agriculture and the global food system, this is a very smart strategy. But farmers also have to contemplate the realities of their region, their ground, the weather, even the local infrastructure that they have and that they sell into, right? And so there are a lot of different factors to consider, all the agronomic factors that have just been outlined here, but then where are markets going and shifting, right? And how can I pull that market analysis into that decision? Because they're really if they're going to make a change or they're going to diversify, they're making a long-term decision. They're really making an investment decision. So this is a really exciting topic because we're actually building a tool to help farmers start to be able to do this type of forecasting. And this is where, again, artificial intelligence and automation comes in, because what you need to do is you need to do some really sophisticated scenario planning, and you need to be able to consider all of these different variables at once, right? And be able to really automate how you're ingesting data and information to then synthesize and make these kinds of decisions. So it's a very timely topic, I think, especially given some of the headwinds that folks are facing in the industry. And it's a given where we are with a lot of these tools and capabilities, we're at a point where we can actually start building some of these business optimization opportunities as well.
So, Elizabeth, the tool that you're talking about and Shale, the digital twinning that you referenced, those are both important tools to help manage risk. Are there other AI tools that farmers can use in terms of looking at their whole year and how they manage risk?
Well, there in the area of business optimization, we actually have identified about 25 or so key functions within the business where we believe that the ingestion of data and information can actually help really make better decision making. So there's a lot of room and area for improvement. And this is everything from, being able to combine existing publicly available sources of information, even the ability for farmers to contribute data into a data cooperative in an aggregated, anonymized way where their information is, of course, protected and secure, but so that they can also get some benchmarking, in terms of where they sit today within the operation, how does that compare to others within their region or of similar size, right? Because these are all, again, analyses and capabilities that help make better decisions into the future.
One other tool that comes to mind, Tim, is conversation. Much about farming is also related to understanding what is going on within the region and what's going on in other farms and as much as what's going on with the weather, for example, or price for that matter. So I talked about some decision intelligence tools earlier and gave you examples of Brazil, gave you examples of Ardent, Agrivision. One example that comes to mind to your question about tools is to have a domain-specific and ag-specific agent that can actually have a conversation with you,
Yeah.
trained in the lexicon and the ontology of ag. So you're not talking to a hallucinating ChatGPT or a Claude, but you're actually talking to a ag expert, right? Um, I think having a customized large language model for your farm or for your business becomes critically important. That is, again, trained in the ontology of ag. We provide such a tool which is called AVA. It used to be called Agricultural Virtual Assistant, but we call it AVA now. Something like that is very easy to deploy for farmers because it's instantaneous trust that can be built within the farming community with a tool like that.
So, just one last question around volatility. If there's an imbalance in terms of AI or automation adaptation across a region or a state or a country, will that increase volatility? What are sort of the unintended consequences of that uneven adaptation?
It's a good question. We should ask our digital twin.
I think from the grower's perspective, the adoption side, adaptation of technology, you get farms that really like to try new technology and are searching for it every day and really like to try it out. And there are, I usually put growers and growing organizations into three different buckets, right? I want to be the first one to try it. I want to play with all the new toys and all the shiny objects. Then you have the growers that say, well, Tim's farm's been running that thing over there. I think he's been doing real well. Okay, I haven't seen any major explosions or he's not going out of business. So now I'll jump in and try it. And then you have the third bucket, which is, I've been running green equipment. I've been running red equipment for 100 years. And until whatever that fancy doohickey is over there, I'm not going to do it until it's painted green or red. Right. And, the percentages of growers over the total market that are in the first bucket versus the third are pretty stark, right? You have, I would say, a very small amount, I would say in the 5% or below that are in that first bucket that really want to try everything. And I would say that you're probably looking at 60, 40, 50% is in that kind of last bucket. So, and if we're talking about companies that are providing technologies that are venture backed, and if they're not bootstrapped or bringing their own capital, That can be a hard story in a boardroom, right? On how you're going to launch the technology and how you're going to continue to raise money and how you're going to continue to penetrate the market. So, with adoption is volatility. I would even say volatility on the startup side or on the solution provider side, right? It's volatility for them. And with a market base that you could stand back and look at all the numbers and say, wow, this market looks big, this market looks good. But when you actually dive into it, it's fragmented, it's very separated, and it's also incredibly relationship based, right? Your cost of customer acquisition in this space is pretty substantial, and it's very relational. So, speaking a little bit to the volatility side, in adapting new technologies, it really helps if you find one grower partner or find a grower and have them be your biggest advocate for your technology and your product. That helps mitigate some of that. But, and there's also from those growers that are adopting those volatile technologies, or they're adopting technologies to help them with the volatility. There's some questions, as we've had some companies, venture-backed companies that have unfortunately had to sell and had to go out of business. And growers are starting to think about that and say, well, if I take this technology into this company, they're starting to ask questions like, hey, what does your runway look like? 5-6 years ago, I've never heard a grower or a farmer say, well, what does the runway of your startup look like? And those are questions that are that are happening today actively. So a lot of different pieces to that puzzle, but it's still a big concern, and a lot of things happening today.
My picture on AI, I live up in wine country, so farmers do have a bias toward data. The great data says like corn market's really good, let's grow corn. Cattle market's really good, let's hold back the heifers. And then specific to us, there's a movie called Sideways, said, hey, Merlot sucks, Pinot's the thing. I know hundreds of growers who, as a result of the market data that came in saying Pinot's going to be worth something, came in and cut out their Merlot and got rid of a $800,000 an acre for a ton crop for 3 years as they grafted in Pinot. 3 years later, when that Pinot crop came in, we were selling Pinot at $1,000 a ton, and Merlot was now worth $1,500 a ton. Would AI have had? It compelled us to continue to change and move forward, follow the data, or does it tell us to lead or live counter to the data? So I think it's going to really matter for the farmer what kind of information they're pulling into their systems and what kind of questions they want to ask before they go out to say, hey, what's the AI answer to that? Every field, I talked about wheat out the back of a combine, that's waste, that's product coming off. In a strawberry field, the machine that's harvesting strawberries is a human being. You imagine we've got mechanical waste, meaning people walking in and out of those fields, making a decision on every berry picked for hundreds and hundreds of people. That's variation through the roof. And then you've got natural variation, like what's out there. So what are you going to measure? You're going to measure like how many berries are available, or are you going to measure how many berries do people actually pick? What is the weather environment that's conditioning those berries to be worthy of picking or not? You've got to be able to know that you're capturing the right data and responding to the question at the right time with the direction you're looking to go. So I wouldn't say that AI is going to do anything more than reframe the same conversations that are going on in coffee shops all throughout the country. It's what am I going to do in next year, given the data I have coming in right in front of me?
I think, Nathan, you're absolutely right. But sorry, Elizabeth, do you want to jump in?
Go ahead, Shale. I think this is such an interesting point because actually this is, I mean, what you're framing it, like all things, right? Quality matters. The quality of the inputs matter in terms of what you're getting in the outputs for decision making. And one of the opportunities that we have, even to build on sort of what we've been talking about with agentic AI, is how can you actually build a tool that allows for debate of a decision or debate of these topics, right? Two different agents with different perspective, leveraging the same body of information, but set up to have a different perspective in terms of what they weight, and open it up for a debate to happen, and maybe farmers would have benefited from having an open debate about whether to do Pinot or Merlot and actually had, so much I think of what we're trying to solve for is farmers often feeling like they're in isolation in terms of making these decisions on their own about their farm. And this is an opportunity to really pull in more perspectives and tap into, their own personal panel of experts. So I think it's a really interesting use case.
I agree with you. I think you want to make automation a utility in your organization, not necessarily the moat, right? Agents are tied to trusted data, whether it's ERP, we're seeing telemetry now being used in some instances, whether there are contracts. You can run 1,000 scenarios that farmers can't do by hand or in a coffee shop for that matter. What happens if there is 20% less rainfall, for example, or 30% port congestion or export shifts that occur in your business. The output isn't a single answer. It's a decision surface that you can steer on, and with appropriate explanations and thresholds for human approval. And AI can actually give you insights on why I made that particular decision. So I don't think AI removes risk. I don't think anyone should be blindsided that if I have AI, all my risk is completely taken care of. AI actually maps it for you, but the decision is still reliant on the human. As I've said before a couple of times in various different conversations, silicon needs carbon. And so silicon being AI and us being carbon farms, obviously, there is no silicon without carbon. So there is a human involvement, a human in the loop, even when you get that decision surface of options that you have in order to run your business.
In the Q&A, someone asks, do we foresee these technological innovations benefiting small-scale farmers by allowing them to stay competitive, or do you foresee these innovations accelerating the trend of farm consolidation?
Nathan, you should definitely weigh on this. I'll go first. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to helping smaller farmers, I will say that what I consider a small farmer in the stuff that we do, I'd say is 1,000 to 5,000 acres is considered a small farm operation. It's still a pretty big organization and a pretty healthy margin or pretty healthy, total revenue from that company per year. But I will say that, based on a lot of different costs, and I know we're going to get into this a little bit later, so I'll save that speech for later, but regulatory costs and other input costs, sometimes some of this farming really only makes sense at a certain scale as far as revenue. Now, there are some technologies that can be used to help smaller farmers. And again, this goes back to the conversation on, is this automation company that's providing the solution, are they venture backed? And if the answer is yes, is the smaller farmer the larger market share? And if those two answers are yes, then yes, those solutions can come in and help those smaller farmers. But if those two answers are no, right? And this is what we're seeing, as Elizabeth had said earlier, hey, the ROI has to be the first and foremost here. And we've seen that in the weeding space and others. So if these companies, think Carbon Robotics and others that are venture backed, Verdant Robotics, Eco Robotics, if they are venture backed, they have to focus on that large market, right? The largest TAM is what these companies are chasing. Now, if they can expand that market later down the road with further product iterations, that's my hope, is that they will see that there's the ability to increase their TAM by maybe making their technology a little bit more modular to be able to smaller and modular at different SKUs or different products to be able to facilitate some smaller operations. But currently today, it really is based on, at least from my perspective and opinion, is based on what these solution providers that are coming in and providing solutions, what does the TAM look like for them, and what is their business strategy, to help them facilitate that. Now, I will say that in farming, there's some very creative business models, right? There's not just a buy this piece of equipment and go use it. Is farming as a service, solution providers as a service, right? So there's another avenue of, hey, if some of these solution providers provided their technology as a service or sold it to companies that then went out and used it as a service, then that's definitely something that can really help some smaller farming operations. Now, I do think that technology will help smaller farms stay in business. We are seeing a really big consolidation of farms over the past 10, 20 years. Unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of production move to South America and into Peru. I will say this last year, 2024, was the first time that the US was a net importer of fresh produce and food, where in every other single year that had been recorded, the US had been an export, net export. So we are seeing the consolidation. We are seeing the bigger farms, and bigger farms are able to take advantage of the technology and build economies of scale and get bigger, and smaller farms that don't necessarily have the capital to take on the technology will have to consolidate. I see a lot of things. Again, I will stand on this firmly and say that regulatory costs is a big part of consolidation, in my opinion.
Yeah, in my view, smaller farmers are pivotal. The strawberry industry, where I've worked for a number of years, has really benefited, oddly enough, from the cannabis industry. A lot of our talent first moved over to those small farms because they had high margins, because they had opportunities to make great wealth, but they moved over to cannabis farming, a lot of our talent did, and learned how to farm on a plant-by-plant basis. The fertility was plant by plant, the attention was plant by plant, the data capture was plant by plant. And as that industry grew and distribution started to eat into the farmer margins, a lot of those players came back to the strawberry industry or to the wine grape industry and brought some of those skills that they brought or that they learned on a plant by plant basis. And they've helped with our fertigation processes. They've helped with our irrigation control and management. They basically started to measure things where before they were measuring it on a field level. Now they're starting to measure it on a plant by plant level. AI and the tools that are out there, mostly based again on the collection of what you're doing, is allowing you to do that. Small farmers if you look at how they spend their time, I tell you, use technology where it matters most. So if you're a micro farmer that's doing a farmer's market, you're probably spending 30% of your time actually getting your product out of the field and into the marketplace. Find ways and channels to get that product out and optimize what's most important to you, your time, or find ways to optimize your revenue through that AI tool, whether it's going direct to restaurant or selling at the farmer's market, or even just dumping the whole load off of the terminal market because tomatoes came in too much, too fast. You can find a way to optimize your time with the data sets. And I think the small farmers benefiting from this is pivotal to our future, because that's the one thing I don't think we're making the most of, is more people with talented invested in their food system with the current tools we have. Smaller and smaller piece of the population really understands where their food's coming from and what it takes to grow even a head of lettuce or a single tomato. So the more we can use tools to help those small people, the better off we are.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think it really depends on the categories of automation that you're looking at. So I would argue that a lot of the consolidation that we're seeing is really, and farms getting larger, is really in response to a lot of the other pressures that producers feel to be the low cost producer in order to compete on the global stage, whether it's regulatory costs or, the other, elements of the cost structure that they are grappling with. And in the fight, especially in the face of other low cost producers, as Ben was referencing, from South America and other geographies. So yes, in those larger operations, you're going to see an inclination to adopt and employ more automation out of necessity because they're trying to do that much more. But when we look at decision support tools, I actually think that opens up a really interesting opportunity for some of your smaller scale producers, because inevitably the cost of those tools is going to come down over time, right? The unit economics are going to come down as those technologies progress. And we've already seen that, right? I mean, the cost of compute has come down considerably from where it was a decade ago, which allows us to do that much more in terms of our modeling capabilities and what we're building from certainly a generative AI perspective. So I do believe that access to there will be a democratization of an improvement in the access of decision support tools in light of how these technologies are progressing.
Shale, I know you have to sign off here in a couple minutes. I just wanted to pause and thank you for being part of the discussion today. We really appreciate your input.
Thank you as well. I'll stay on for another 2 minutes and I'll jump off.
Thank you. So I want to move over towards regulation and maybe even in ethics and technology, as we know, moves faster than rules. So thinking about that, what guide rails do we need to put up to ensure that automation is a fair, safe, and trusted part of the sector?
Yeah, quite a bit of regulation. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Straightforward usage agreements. I mean, I think that's really key and critical. It should be crystal clear when a farmer is engaging or leveraging a technology or contributing their data or information to anything. There should be very clear, concise, straightforward language around privacy, safety, how that information is being protected, encrypted where necessary. Farmers should own that data. They should be in control of it and know if it's being used for any purpose outside of its original intent. And they should share in any of the upside opportunities that are created in the aggregation of that data and information. I really believe that just having that very straightforward agreement and relationship with farmers to build trust is a really critical component here.
And I'll add on to what Elizabeth is saying is that what our Western Grower Science team actually utilizes a program called Green Link to be able to have growers input their food safety data in to be able to give that data to the government. I believe it's USDA, to be able to understand and interpret the different data points on if there is any food safety concerns, if there have been some hits on different pathogens that have been noticed in the field, or for food safety concerns before harvest. Not a lot of people know, but when you go to harvest fresh leafy greens, you actually have to come in. Thanks, Shale. We'll see ya. You have to come in and take samples and actually run that through a lab process to be able to say yes, a randomized sample throughout field, and say yes, there are no food safety concerns, no presence of E. coli or others before that field is harvested. And so growers are putting this data into this platform called GreenLink. And I have sat in the board, in our board meetings when this has come up at Western Growers and said, our biggest concern is if we do put in instances of this field, hit hard for E. coli and we had to diss that whole field, if I put that information in this data set, is that going to be weaponized and used against me? That is one of the first things that our growers have said, like, hey, I'd love to help this effort, but really don't want this to come back and get me, right? So the anonymization of the data for that specific use case is absolutely critical for growers who even want to be a part of this stuff, right? So it's having the cooperation of the growers means that there has to be a layer of protection, because you're asking or requiring the data to be able to help move some things down the road, but they want to be protected in that sense because they have to continue to run their business, right? So definitely, that's one story that came to mind as Elizabeth was talking. Um, now when it comes to regulatory and making sure that products are safe and, how do we continue to farm with regulatory presence? I will say that, as I just described, we have to have food safety checks and others. And one thing I will say, Tim, is that, any fresh produce that's brought, and we're talking berries, produce, a lot of fresh products that are come into the US that are imported in, they are not checked. They are not held at the same standards for safety that the producers in the US are. So, they have to provide the same product at the same specs to the retailer as what Walmart and Kroger's and others will dictate and say, hey, your product is organic, has to be certified, has to meet these specs. But as they come in, USDA and others, 0% of those imported products are checked. And that's a regulatory burden that the US farmers have to deal with. And through a study that Lynn Hamilton is a agriculture economist at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. She's been doing this study over years and years, and her latest numbers on regulatory compliance and regulatory costs are $1,636 an acre is what fresh produce and berry and other producers in the US have to pay. $1,600 an acre just on regulatory compliance, right? Just in order to be able to sell these things, in order to be able to provide these products to a seller or to a retailer, it's a big burden. Can be a crushing blow for a lot of companies. We talk about smaller farmers, I mentioned earlier, right? That's a heavy burden in order to keep your company and your farm going. I'll give up the floor and Nathan can give his thoughts. I'd like to, if you could restate the question again, Tim. I think there were some other parts of that question that I can answer as well.
Yeah, could you restate that? That'd be great, Tim.
How can we? Sorry, I moved ahead. Technology often moves faster than rules. What guardrails do we need to make sure that automation is fair, safe, and trusted?
So I just looked up the price of wheat today. It's about $5.47 a bushel. If you look at the price of wheat about 1906, it was probably around $3.85 a bushel. You're looking at less than 100% increase in the price of wheat since over 100 years. Over that 100 years, 100% of the burden of meeting the cost of economy, the cost of fuel, the cost of your house, the cost of everything else has been borne out by the farmer becoming more productive. It happens everywhere in the system, the value chain. Really look really close at what pressures the farmer has, and then ask the ethical question of how do I feel about giving a fair wage to that farmer or a fair opportunity to that farmer. And it's going to take a wholesale change to make a difference in that. But I do see like farmers are going to adopt what makes them viable next year. The core business of a farmer is to go to the bank, go to a banker, somebody with a pile of money, and tell them, I've got a plan. I'm going to put this seed in the ground somewhere. I'm going to put these value adds on top of that seed, and I'm going to return the cost of that seed plus this much. And you're going to get most of that money or some of that money, all that back. I'm going to get some of it, and a lot of it's going to pay for that stuff in the middle. Every piece of innovation is a deviation from that plan. It means that I went to the banker and told them I didn't necessarily have it right the first time. So be right, be defensive, be strong when you go and deliver something good to the farmer, and know that you're out to make that farmer's life better and more optimized, because the next generation is probably going to be selling the same product at the same price again. So I'm big in finding a way and that a lot of that burden has been regulatory. We continue to think that the beginning of the value chain is just going to translate down the line. It hasn't translated down the line. Farmers grew more product, scaled up just to make the same revenue, and put their kids through college and do the same things. We've enabled through inexpensive food generations of people to have to do other things and move on. If you look at the average amount of money that a person spends today that they earn, they probably work for 30 minutes a day to feed themselves and their family. If you looked at 1900, when they were how many hours a day they worked to feed themselves and their family, it was hours and hours. So pushing on the ethics of the farmer is an important thing, but also realize how much of that efficiency has created and value to you and able to allow you to do so many other things along the way.
Thank you. So a resource question in the Q&A asks, is there any business or organization, for example, university scientists, USDA, or grower groups that are keeping track of new technologies as they are adopted in a comprehensive manner? Are you aware of anything that you can share?
I think we have a
Not
few
that I'm
that
aware
represented
of.
here today.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's not that I'm aware of that a regulatory agency is keeping track of technologies. If anything, I had a tour with Chris Purdy, the Chief Innovation Officer for USDA AMS. We did a field tour in Salinas a few weeks ago. And the sentiment is the same, that the industry is the one taking on the technology head on, and quite simply, I believe the answer is no. There's not anybody that's keeping track of all these things and understanding where the technologies lay and where they fit. If for the most part I get growers, they call me and say, hey, you're the automation guy for Western growers, what stuff should I be thinking about and what stuff should I be taking advantage of on my farm? But no,
I was
nothing
going to
today.
call out Western growers, Ben. I was going to call you out and say, it's Ben Pallone.
Same.
There are people out there that are doing some of it. It is very scattered because technology moves so fast. And for us to recommend, I mean, again, farmers are looking for the most optimized opportunity at the least price or cost. So often technology itself is not the answer because the cost basis for it is still too high. It's maybe the second mover or the third mover in there that's bringing that technology in. It still goes to you as a farmer needing to know what you really want to answer, what you really need, and having at least as much data around what's happening in your farm as possible so that you can start to build a threshold for what you're looking for. Consultants all over the place that are doing some of that. And there's great organizations like Farm Foundation putting up podcasts that are telling us what's available out there or where to go look for it. You can go to the Husker Harvest Days. There's shows in the Midwest that are doing stuff all over. You've got Future of Robotics in Agriculture, FIRA in California, or the Tulare World Ag Expo. And it's bringing you the latest and a varied amount of technology that is here to make a big difference. So I think, Ben, is that the best way to go find your technology?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you brought up a good point, Nathan, about there are some other companies that are coming up that are kind of being in between. These are for-profit companies and entities that work for growers that can be technology integrators. Access Ag comes to mind with Jason Mello, and there's a few others. The names are blanking on me currently. But they kind of act as technology integrators, right? And they're trusted partners with growers. And this is the key, right? The key is that the startups or solution provider companies are not paying an integrator, because then at some point they're just a satellite employee or contractor of those companies. The root of it is to get to someone that a grower trusts to be able to integrate and suggest technologies. In order to make that stuff stick. But yes, that's definitely a great avenue for technology that's coming in. But as far as, again, the root of the question is something that's being maintained or, keep an eye on from a federal or other governmental agency. There's nothing that I know of today. And I keep a list of stuff that I have just because running out of memory space in my brain. So I keep spreadsheets and lists of things so when I get calls from growers, I can recommend things as needed for what their concerns and pain points are.
So because you guys were kind enough to say Farm Foundation, I'll share with everybody our campus, which you can see our beautiful barn behind me. We demonstrate every year. Well, demonstrate wouldn't be the right word. We plant crop technologies. So we have 5 different crop technologies that we're showing at our farm. So visitors there can see what some of these things look like. And we'll often companion plant different things. So for example, we have Kiasote, which is the original form of corn as it was developed, or as it came into nature. And then we have things like indigen corn from McDonald's, which is a corn that's bred specifically for beef production to reduce methane emissions. And so, for us, we really like it's so much about that just show and tell. I think the best example of this and the analysis that I really enjoy is from Grand Farms near Fargo.
Bring them up.
Yeah, I think they do remarkable sort of farm level analysis of technologies, both crop and other innovations. So that's one I would share.
And I would throw in the Grand Farm for Georgia that just
Yes,
opened up
Georgia.
this year. Like, it's another place where you're going to be able to look for technology and find ways to make things happen.
Right, absolutely.
So you're going to adopt, as a farmer, you're probably going to adopt technology that is not quite ready for prime time. I put that equivalent to the boneyard out in the trees behind my grandpa's house. We had tons of technology, and some of it was just 2 pieces of metal welded together that was abandoned but tested and tried. You're going to go through some of that, but in your deal, if you measure how much you've got at risk, it definitely, don't be afraid of going after the big challenges you have.
I'm glad the boneyard made it into the conversation. That's something that we use as a term in agriculture production, and I say it all the time. You can tell how innovative a grower is by how large a boneyard is. Right? Yeah. You go drive
and not
out
all
there.
those ideas are bad. Like,
No,
they
no,
were
they're
one
not.
weld, one thing away from being a great solution.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Love that
100%.
concept. I think there's probably a virtual boneyard too for different software products and other things that have been
nice
tried.
thing is that you can delete and rewrite over that, right? That's the nice part about that. If the memory space is, it doesn't remove the heartache from the people involved. But yeah, no, you're right.
Doesn't take up physical real estate.
Even in the 1700s, Thomas Jefferson was really sort of obsessed with this and thought that farmers were the ultimate innovators. And he loved to visit farms and see we call them farm hacks today. But that was a big part of what he did. And he liked to get other people's ideas and then iterate on those. And so, Nathan, you're absolutely right. This is just part of farm culture. That's just so important.
Well,
so
they are the ultimate problem solvers. And I've been talking a little bit about the business optimization side of things, but one of the areas that we really believe is ripe for automation, if you will, is the amount of information that farmers have in their heads and how they are using and managing such a set of complex tasks, logistics, day in and day out and across a season. And even if you think about passing the farm to the next generation, there's a role for transferring a lot of that knowledge in such a way that it can live on for those, right? That memory, that experience, what worked, what didn't work, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel moving forward. And there's a lot of opportunity to formalize and institutionalize that in the context of building a more comprehensive business plan for the operation.
Here's a funny anecdote, Elizabeth. I worked at Tanner & Annell, a large vertically integrated grower here in the Salinas Valley, and I was sitting with Brian Annell, one of the owners, and we were talking about technology and some other stuff. It was funny, and he just sat back and he said, we are at the entirety of our business, and they had, before TNA was formed, there was Bud Annell and others. So the entirety of our business, we are just getting into the point where computers have been around longer than the manual time. But as of like a few years ago, the manual amount of writing things in ledgers or writing them in notebooks. If you go into any farm, any irrigation, into any shop, in any farm, you will see stacks of spiral notebooks where people have recorded things over the years, right? So, technology is here and it's not going away. It's here to help. But yeah, that level of institutional knowledge is a huge amount of data source that is compiled into spiral notebooks and other ledgers that I think are just collecting dust, and would be great to somehow get that into some level of database to be able to have some foundation for some of this stuff. And I'll say, yeah, when someone says, oh, I've been a corn farmer for 40 years, that means they've had 40 shots, right, to make revenue for their company and to keep their farm going. And it's just a crazy thing to think about. 40 years, you've had 40 opportunities to keep your business and your farm going. It's crazy.
Well, and when that information is actually put into some kind of digital format, then you can actually leverage it and pull it into your scenario planning and decision making. You can run analytics on that to look at historical trends over time and even compare aspects of the operation relative to what was happening on a macro basis, whether it was crop prices or other, sort of global macro influences or trends. So this is in what we're co-building. There's a foundational piece to this business optimization, which is actually leveraging artificial intelligence and automation to get those paper records into that kind of a format, get some of the information out of the right of through natural language query and other ways to actually pull that into a format in which it can be utilized and leveraged for analytics and decision making.
Oh, I will say, just one thing that would be, I think a lot of technologists like yourself, Elizabeth, would consider this simple. Here's a very simple idea. One of our growers, JV Smith, large farming operation in Arizona, we call it Desert Regions, Matt McGuire, who's the chief ag officer for that company, he stood up on stage in one of our conferences that we run in November. He stood up on stage and said, hey, look, I deal with chemical input labels all day long. Where can I apply stuff? Where can I apply stuff? Again, this is in the specialty veg where there's a lot of rotations, a lot of different pests, a lot of different things. He said, I would just love something that I could just look up on my phone to be able to say, hey, I'm applying for this pest or for this, soil disease or something, and I've already sprayed this and this. So what's the material I can apply that will be beneficial that doesn't counteract with the other two that I've already applied, right? He says, so even today, Matt's got to stick all this stuff on his desk and start going through all the label notebooks and be able to try and pull all that stuff. I mean, I please let me know, Elizabeth. I mean, you're a technologist to understand that stuff can just be queried and, be able to say, yeah, great.
Pulled into one system.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
All right, we'll talk more. We're going to put that on the roadmap.
I see a few questions in the chat.
Yeah, I was
Tim,
going to jump to that.
Ben, pull some of those out. Yeah,
I will. Yeah, Ben, you had mentioned the 40 chances, and if you've never read the book, Howard Buffett wrote a book a few years ago called 40 Chances that really tells that farmer story and how the evolution of farming over the past few decades has affected farmers. It's a really great read. So yeah, one of the questions I think is interesting in the Q&A says many ag tech tools remain one-dimensional and don't integrate with the systems farmers already depend on, such as ERPs, compliance platforms, and other farm management systems. What do you see as the biggest hurdles and opportunities for startups to build solutions that truly fit into this existing ecosystem, which I think connects perfectly with our conversation we just finished?
It's so hard for startups to perform in the ag space. I mean, just point blank, the margins that farmers are dealing with already means that there's not a lot of excessive cash, and you've got to be, as Ben brought up earlier, you got to be a certain scale to have the excessive cash to take a risk and go back to the banker and say, yeah, this is where my plan didn't quite work. So I need more money, or I want to do something else different and deviate from that plan. And I got word from this startup guy, or this guy who's selling me this bug in a jug, that it's going to work and it's going to make a 5-10% difference in my revenues and economics. That's a huge leap for them. And startups, in the same token, are trying to find a way to capture as much value out of that group as possible. So they're building their own autonomy. I mean, there's a million companies building their own autonomy. It's somewhat of a shame. There often you see ERPs that are more standalone and they're not totally just API based. You'll see like a whole bunch of proprietary data capture stuff. It's really tough for both sides of the coin. And I do believe like the best thing you can do is know the farmers you're trying to deal with, be out there in the field with them, and be sure that you're dealing with a problem that they really have. And farmers are not great at telling you their actual problem. They're really good at telling you where it hurts, their pain. They're like, I got a problem, my knee hurts. They don't know that it's the cartilage or the slip disc in their back. They're absolutely able to tell you where it hurts, but they can't always tell you where the problem is. So it really takes a good listening task.
Where the problem is and where a solution can fit. And well said, Nathan. A lot of technologists and a lot of companies, again, this gets back to, is this a venture-backed company, or is this a, bootstrapped, their own privately funded company? Again, if this is a venture-backed company, they have to provide revenue, and they have to go down a pipeline, and they have to go down, their product schedule. And yes, growers, and I have lived this at a couple different companies, startup ag tech companies that are venture backed that I've worked for. The growers say, man, you have this data. I want to take this data and we plummet it in here and we want to see. And as a company, you say, yes, we can do that. Happy to do that. But then you say, well, what is it worth, right? Every effort that a venture backed company, or any company for that matter, not specific to venture back, has to have, an understanding of the value proposition, and not just a value proposition for more revenue as a secondary product, but more as if I have my team, it's a certain size, I can go down and see the other opportunity here. But does that take away from what my core business is, what my value proposition is? I mean, so many of these companies are, running from series rounds, from A to B to C to D, from seed to pre-seed, and they have 16 months, 20 months, and before they raise another round, and that money is really going towards what the core business is. And if there is the ability to pivot to provide a secondary, solution or product or SKU, there is a potential for that. And again, I will go back to say, growers, and we've said this before, growers are the most innovative people, and they will always look for, oh, I could do this with this, and I can do this with this. But then again, it has to be that it always goes back to the conversation. The company sits back and goes, okay, well, Jeff Morrison at Grimway says he wants to know where every single weed is on a GPS map. And we can provide that to him, but that will take a lot of time for our software development team to do it. How large is that market? Again, it goes back to the TAM, right? And is it worth the resources? And is it worth the money and the time and those? And so I will say that growers, and I have struggled with this working in product leadership for several startup companies, that growers are the first one to say, I need this tool. I want to put this tool in my tool belt. And you want to help them and provide those solutions, but you have to stand back and say, okay, is this a product we can sell to multiple growers in order to capture the revenue enough to keep going, and it doesn't detract from our core product and our core business, and the core value proposition.
So the question was about where, as an entrepreneur or innovator, to focus. Was that that was the kind of the crux of the question? So I'm just going to share one line that I love from a retired executive from a well-known equipment manufacturer that we all know well. And he said, know how your customer makes money. it's such a simple concept, but it's really so integral to understanding your customer, know how they make money, and know what is preventing them from doing that in the most efficient way possible today. And that's where you start when you're really wanting to ideate or innovate on something new. And it's just a very customer centric, very customer focused way. And he had some very surprising examples of the direction that that took them as a company that you would not have actually thought of without really asking that question in a very disciplined way, and then spending a lot of time with that customer to really understand it.
Well, Elizabeth, I think you're dead nuts on to something there. I've interviewed hundreds of strawberry farmers. And I mean, strawberry farming is not a common industry if you compare to all the people in our audience, but it's a very cash intensive business. And a farmer farming 100 acres of strawberries probably has a bigger bank loan than a Midwest farmer who's got six sections of farming going on. So it's a real activity where they're making money. And I've asked them, why is it you're making money and the guy over there across the road is not? I mean, it's virtually the same soil, virtually the same growing conditions, a lot of times same genetics. What's happening? And he goes, I got good people. And I think you said no. Knowing what that means is a big deal. Like, what is good people? Like, is it that everybody picks fast? Everybody, and I've come to the resolution that a lot of times it's everything is predictable. They fit in the data pattern that farmer can understand and react to. So people pick the same amount of fruit per day. They show up the same number of days a week. They are, consistent in most of the things that they can do that allows that farmer to react in a good way. And if you take that, like that same thing, how people make money, there's a Midwest high precision cedar manufacturing company that I know a lot of growers love the company, but many of them have their high precision cedar in the barn still because for that startup to make them their money faster, they had to build it bigger. The machine became larger and more complicated and got to the point where it was just better for the farmers' economics, how they make money, to put the old cedar in the field than have this very high precision, super technological cedar have a single line or a single component break down in the middle and cause them grief and more variation down the line. So, I mean, knowing how they make money and being a part of their regular everyday business is really important.
So the next question is kind of an eternal one in the investment VC space, but I think it's poignant considering the incredible tightening of margins and other challenges in food and ag right now. But many tech startups have been operating 3 to 7 years, often backed by VC funding, but haven't yet reached financial stability or strong adoption. From your perspectives, what signals should farmers and industry partners look for to distinguish a sustainable solution from those that are not likely to survive long term? An eternal question.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Baha. Baha is a good friend. We've worked together as previous colleagues. Thank you for joining in. There, as I said, growers are starting to ask. I said at the beginning of this, growers are asking, what is your runway? How long are you going to be in business? Some of the markers are, what does your runway look like? How long are you going to be in business? Who are the people on that team? Are those people that are, from a local community, from local farming communities that have bought into the ag tech and say, man, this is a cool solution. I want to work for this company. That relational side, the business side. So has that really penetrated into the agriculture industry, or is it a very small group that's still very much international based, right? Some of the other markers are being able to support, right? Support and service. I tell companies all the time, if your equipment is down for more than 2 hours, you might as well stop selling it, right? If there's a problem or an issue with your equipment or with your solution, you need to fix it within an hour or two, so that way they can get moving back up again. You're not going to make it. So whether it's financial viability or you can, people in the industry have bought into that solution and whether or not they can service and, make the solution work for the long term. And again, the ROI has to work, and it's not just ROI, when you say ROI has to work, ROI has to work. How does that work as an internal totality of a system, of an operational system, right? And really, the risk of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to solve plays a big part of that. And I'll give an example like automated irrigation. Automated irrigation is something that's happening over in the Central Valley of California, a lot of permanent crops, a lot of longer cycle crops. And so there is also a California regulation, SGMA, SGMA. It's a groundwater mitigation regulation that is going to limit how much water growers can actually use. So automated irrigation is coming into play really hard, but irrigation is a big risk to a growing operation, right? So if I'm standing back as a grower and I look at someone who's coming and trying to sell me an automated irrigation, I'm going to say, man, okay, the company seems to have a good runway. They've got people in their organization that are from down the street. I could call those people, they can service and support it. But this is a really big risk, right? If this thing doesn't connect or if it doesn't work well, it doesn't turn the water valves on, and I don't know about it, my entire crop and my entire revenue for the whole season is done. Not to mention the costs as well. So,
and I've lost that irrigator.
Yeah, well, lost the irrigator or that, that could, in my opinion, Nathan, that plays into the ROI of that system, right? Like you're not going to get rid of your irrigator. I will be the first one to say that. You're not going to get rid of that person for a long time, right? Which works into the ROI calculation. But I would say it's really those levers, those 4 levers that I think growers really think about when it comes to, making a bet on some technology, and especially some of the venture-backed ones. Yeah, great question, Baha. Thank you.
So Amy, who's one of our next gen program participants here at Farm Foundation, asked a question related to your story about Sideways, Nathan. And she said, if AI systems can identify the most optimal individual choice, but universal adoption of the same choice leads to negative systematic outcomes, as in the Pinot versus Merlot example, what principles or mechanisms should guide allocation of access to those benefits, and who should decide? Oh, I think you're still muted, Nathan.
I said, wow, that's a question well above my normal pay grade.
That question deserves its own webinar.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm glad it's directed towards Nathan. Go get him, buddy.
Yeah. But I mean, we've done it in corn, we've done it in cattle, we've done it in pork, we've done it everywhere as farmers. Like it's working for my neighbor, I'm going to do a lot of that. Or it works for me, I'm going to scale that thing to the roof. And I'm not here to say like that there's a simple answer to that, because the whole CRP, Conservation Resource Program in the Midwest, was all built around taking acres out to increase lever up the value of those crops that are still being grown, taking non-productive acres out of production. And what's happened is like non-productive low value acres were taken out, and then we've moved corn to more valuable areas and increased the yield in places where it'll grow more. So net, we probably grew the same amount of corn. The market was still in that same level of fragility that it was. But some farmers got on to a reoccurring payment schedule. So I can't give a great answer to that. I would say you could go back to the coffee shop days where the farmers went into the coffee shop, and most of us were giving some information out, but not giving the full story. Or it always seemed like in a drought, the last guy at the table got the least amount of rain. The last guy to tell them how much rain they got the least amount. Or in a wet weather season, the last guy who talked at the table got the most rain. Information is going to only lead you to some set of data that you should make an individual decision on. And some of these decisions are long-term. They're you'll make the decision this year and it'll be 5-10 years. I mean, the guys who plant almonds, they're waiting 5 to 10 years to get their crops, and their first crops. So the return on those are 5 and 7 years out. So, I mean, it's a really tough path. I mean, most of us are in agriculture because we love it and because there's a certain passion for it. Just don't let that ever wane, even though there's some kind of economic challenge on there. You'll find a way to make some revenue, enough that you should be able to continue to go, and be aware that crops change, cycles change. Salinas doesn't grow sugar beets anymore. That was a big cycle. Napa doesn't grow prunes much anymore. I think the last orchard was ripped out of Sonoma not long ago. I remember seeing that on my way over Anderson Valley. So I would tell you, like, everything's got some cycle on it, and find some way to. You don't have to lead the path through it, but pay attention, close attention. There's not a good answer to that question. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. So I'm not sure if any of you have any expertise in the area of hydroponics, but there is a question that says, in hydroponics, technology is the core and foundation of the overall product. How does that fit into the overall discussion we're having? Are there any recommendations for the hydroponic space?
No, I mean, it kind of goes into CEA, controlled environment agriculture, and others. Those spaces are very well equipped to handle technology. It's not outside. It's not, necessarily weather dependent, and others. So, there's a lot of CEA organizations and hydroponic, that automation can really be at the forefront, right? And my opinion would be, from what I understand, disease control in hydroponics and other CEA organizations. If you have the most up to date, it seems like a lot of companies are whoever has the best tech is starting to win the day. But water availability, again, it's a lot of the same. Water availability, costs for the organization as far as utility costs, power. It's usually power and water and disease pressure. As soon as you get disease in one of those, buildings or in a hydroponic facility, you generally have to wipe out the entire thing to clear the disease and then start over again. So, but as far as I know, the technology really works well in controlled environment spaces and hydroponic as well facilities. But again, a lot of the same core tenets apply, right? Like, get the automation where you can, and see what has the best ROI.
The key value propositions for controlled environment agriculture are, like, being able to shift the market, move to parts of the year that generally would not have supply from this region. And at that point, like, the Dutch have it perfected in the sense that they're growing it, but their major cost structure is they're going to grow in the winter months. The major cost is heating, and with low cost natural gas, they've been able to make it viable and valuable. So, I mean, really understand what you're trying to do with it. Ben brought up nicely that, like, in plant production, where you're growing plants, whether it's a flower nursery, poinsettia farm, something in specific, disease control is a massive value add to it. But again, and one of my famous sayings, or my favorite sayings, is poinsettias are worthless in January. So being able to control when you deliver that product to market is really important, and being able to put heat to the product, create artificial daylight, shift that growing season means that you can deliver that product on the target that you expected, and you can go in and realize that, locally fresh grown lettuce, which is a common CEA component, in January in New York, is a valuable thing. Locally fresh grown berries in Amsterdam in the middle of almost any time of the year is a really valuable thing, because the weather isn't always, likely to put a lot out there. The Japanese, if you look at the Japanese market from 1971 to current, the value of a strawberry has skyrocketed. The quantity of production has fallen through the floor. So you can buy an individual strawberry now for a high value. And what happened there is that growers, to maintain their reducing their smaller families, grew fewer acres, till a farmer that used to grow 100 acres with labor that they brought in or had in their family has now got 2 or 3 people farming it. They're growing 2 or 3 tunnels instead of 100 acres. But to grow 2 or 3 tunnels and meet their economic needs, they now deliver those strawberries in the middle of the winter where they're high value, instead of delivering them in the middle of the summer where they would naturally grow outdoors, where they were low value, put a lot of input in it, a lot of work. And instead of selling, that whole market has shifted. Instead of selling strawberries for small dollars per pound, they're selling individual strawberries for $10, $20 per berry. So that, knowing how that controlled environment agriculture and hydroponics, the technology is an all in making sure that you hit your revenue pieces and equips you for that piece, hit the timing you want.
Right. So let's wrap up with a question or two focused on the future. So if you could pull one lever today to accelerate adoption of automation in agriculture, would that be investment, policy, education, or something else?
Happy to start. I think all of those things. Yeah. Policy would be a big one. Reduction of regulation. Someone had asked a question about, what specific regulations. We're talking about, it's still in California, the use of autonomous tractors and vehicles are not allowed. We're working towards that. We really feel like autonomy can really help growers. And again, when we're talking about venture-backed companies, and I will say this, that Hort Innovations in Australia is an incredible program, and there is a levy, as they call it, or a tax that growers pay, and all that money goes into a bucket, and that Hort Innovations will take that money and distribute it out for specific research programs. But there's a big part of it, and I think the research kind of mirrors, and it's the same as our NISF grants. But they have another part of this, which is, and Europe does a lot of this too, which is the commercialization side. So how do we help growers start to commercialize some of this? Some of this think it's a big risk. People like Tom McHugh at Hort Innovations, they will use that money to help run field days, or to have events, or to buy equipment and then have growers test it out, try to run equipment as a service. And I really feel like there is a big piece of that that's missing here. We are very hopeful in Make America Healthy Again and other movements within the federal government. Our government affairs team is doing incredible work and trying to see where we can help. But I will say that there is a big gap to fill there on the commercialization side, and beyond the traditional grants for research. And those are big value. I'm not saying stop those. I'm saying that there needs to be an effort on the commercialization side of this to really get the adoption kicked up a little bit and get it up a notch. And the venture-backed companies have been doing this themselves over the years. But there are many factors that determine its success or failure, and they're doing it all on their own. And I would encourage to say that there could be a really big benefit here to have, whether it's federal, state, or local, to help. We did just get, UCA&R just got a great grant from GoBiz and from the state of California to help ag tech adoption innovation. We really hope that we can steer that into a commercialization perspective. But I'd say we are still lacking in that quite a bit. And again, on the regulatory side, the autonomous tractors thing in California is, unfortunate. There are other states, Arizona and others, and people make, NBC News, the news came on and said, we're using autonomous taxis in San Francisco and Phoenix and in others, but we can't have autonomous tractors, right? And these are jobs that are done at night from 10 p.m. till 5 in the morning on a tractor, doing input applications that can easily be automated. And it was a study done, I believe, by the government, by maybe the DOT or another, maybe through Cal OSHA, saying that spray rig applicator jobs are mostly go unfulfilled. They're talking 40 to 50% of those jobs are unfilled today, that autonomy can fit a specific need to do that. So regulation is a hard point. I think we're a little bit behind the 8 ball on the commercialization. You have EU countries in the EU that provide grants to say, if you want to adopt a technology that helps with certain efforts that the government is pushing or vying for, whether that's soil health or reduction of chemical input, we will write you a check for 50% of that equipment's cost, whether that's a laser weeder, a smart sprayer, or something of the sort. They will provide 50% of the cost for that. And think about what that would do for the commercialization and adoption of the technology within our farms today. It would be a huge help.
So, I mean, I don't even know if I'm going to address the question at all, but I want to put a plug in for this. I feel like our most critical component of this system we're talking about is the farmer itself. And we keep talking about technology to solve the farmer's problems. I'd like to talk a little bit about technology that's going to continue the most difficult parts, creating farmers. And California, UC Ag and Natural Resources has done a great job in hosting and creating the Farm Robotics Challenge. We asked colleges around the country, around the world, matter of fact, to get a robot, find a farmer, and you can get any robot as a starting point, or you can build your own robot, or just have technology and find a farmer and ask them what hurts. Get out there as a group of college students and work to solve the problem. 99% of them won't solve the problem, but maybe they'll effectively quantify and challenge, take on that challenge. And if 1% of those students becomes interested in agriculture, becomes a next level technologist, they're going to be the person that's going to help solve some of these challenges that Ben and I probably were working on, we'll spend a lifetime working on, but won't be around to see the end, the light at the end of the tunnel. Sorry, Ben. It doesn't mean tomorrow, but somewhere you're going to get to that. And the other part is that we talked a lot about the knowledge that these farmers that are out there today have. If you have a tractor or a product or a machine, I've been on 1,000 farms around the world where everywhere I go, they grow the same crop. But the question is, but have you farmed here? Have you done it here? Like Southern Fresno County, Western Australia, Netherlands, that same crop may grow, but it doesn't mean that farming it looks anything like it does anywhere else. And so getting some kid out there from a college who's engaged in that Farm Robotics Challenge to ask the questions, where does it hurt? And then they spend the time in finding out where the problem is going to be really good. I mean, you're just creating the next generation of it. And latching onto that, within California, we've started the Farm Robotics Academy, where high schoolers are getting kits of robots and going out and learning to assemble those same robots that are being used at the college level by students to solve farmer problems, where they're building on their own tools and stuff. And then at the next level, at the researcher level, thousands of researchers around the world, PhDs, are using them for phenotyping, specific weed management in North Dakota. I mean, those kind of things I think are going to be what re-engages everybody with what it takes to grow food in our system. Put value on what we have most important, which is, I mean, again, I work for F3 Innovate, $30 billion, 1/5 of the agricultural economy comes out of 5 counties in Southern California. Getting any of those students re-engaged in that farm and find out what it takes to grow a fresh nectarine, what it takes to grow a sugar, a sweet potato, or a table grape. It's all of that is really valuable. That represents half of the plate It's the same half of the plate that we talk about that makes us healthy. It's the same half of the plate that makes America like defensible, strong nation. I think getting our kids, our youth, re-engaged with that and bringing the and coming up with their own technology. I'll wager that I can go to a farm and a farmer will tell me half of the solutions that they would to telling their own grandkid. Like they'll work with their grandkids, and I would love to see that all over the place out here. So I encourage you to look into the Farm Robotics Challenge and the Future of Robotics Agriculture Conference, where we're going to announce or we're going to give out prizes to some of the winners from around the country. And then look into the Farm Robotics Academy and pressure your states to get involved in that. Reach out to UC Ag and Natural Resources here in California.
Thank you for that endorsement, Nathan. I was fortunate enough to be one of the judges in the Farm Robotic Challenge last year, and I will tell you, it was some hard decisions and absolutely remarkable what these students came up with, and I'm so excited to see what happens this year. We've also put in a pitch. We have on our farm, we inherited a crop of asparagus, and we're not so great about keeping our eye on it. And any of you that have grown asparagus know what an unpredictable crop it was. And we're sure that a robot could replace us much better than what we're.
There's the example right there, a farmer asking for help.
Absolutely. I will also say Farm Foundation is about to announce next month a major initiative focused on beginning farmers. It's a huge investment being made with Farm Foundation and some industry partners to do exactly what Nathan was talking about. So thank you for that. Before we wrap up, I just want to say, are there any other issues or ideas that we didn't get to today that any of you wanted to share before we wrap up? Well, terrific. You were all fantastic. I think we covered pretty thoroughly most of the issues around this. Thank you so much for your time, Ben and Nathan, Elizabeth and Shale. Fantastic discussion. And thank you to our audience. You asked some great questions, and we're really grateful for that. We appreciate your engagement and would love your feedback. So please take a moment to share your comments about today's session in the brief survey that you'll get at the conclusion of this forum. Once again, I'll ask if you enjoyed today's session, please support Farm Foundation by making a donation, and we'll drop the link again in the chat for you right now. Thank you once again for joining us today, and thank you again to our speakers. Really wonderful discussion today, and we'll now conclude this forum. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Tim.